All of us have that one thing in our life that we gravitate to, that we just absolutely love. And for some people, it's music, and others, it's movies. Some people, it's cars, or it could be virtually anything, right? It could be video games. But for me, it was always military aviation. And God used military aviation in my life to protect me and to call me to himself. And I can see clearly from a child exactly how he used these things in my life. Now, I'm going to share my story with you today, but I want to hear your story as well. I'd love for you to leave a comment and share with me how God used something in your life to either protect you or call you to himself. Hi, I'm Pastor Don Purdom, and this channel exists to encourage, inspire, and build you up in the Word of God, as well as understanding how we as Christians can live in the culture around us. Our stories are integral to who we are. Our experience informs who we become and who we will become in the future. And while Scripture is the center point for understanding the Christian life and understanding who we are and our identity with Christ, God also uses both his creation as well as our experiences to reveal himself to us, to show us who he is, to show us that he loves us. And he also uses those experiences to test us, to see, will we hold on to our faith? Well, Jesus reminded us oftentimes, or at least in one verse, that if we had the faith of a mustard seed, we could move a mountain. And do we have that kind of faith? That is a core question each one of us has to ask. So back to military aviation. As a child, I loved being around my grandparents. My grandfather worked for the Department of Defense up at Hill Air Force Base outside of Salt Lake City in Ogden, Utah. And that was where at the time, F-105s and F-4s were stationed as a young child, thinking back at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And just being enamored with these jets that were roaring over the house all hours of the day and night. And I'd go running out in the backyard to watch them and to see how amazing that it was. And I just fell in love with that every time we would go and see them. And my father worked for the FAA, so I had further more distant type of relationship with civilian aircraft. We also had near us in Oklahoma City, Tinker Air Force Base, and I would see a lot of military planes flying around all the time. And when they started having air shows, I would start going to the air shows. And I'll get into that in just a second. I've got a couple of pictures I'll share with you. But why is this story so important? It becomes important because I believe God put this love of military aviation in my life to protect me. What do I mean by that? So, I had a good upbringing as a child. It wasn't great, but it was good. And my parents were together, but it wasn't a healthy relationship. And being the oldest of, 4, of course, gradually, it started with just me. And then 3 years later, my brother. And then another 3 or 4 years later, my sister. And then I've got a younger brother who's about 11 years younger than I am. And so around 10 years old, 9, 10, 11 years old, I really began experiencing some of the challenges of the oldest of 4 as my parents were going through marital struggles. Don't need to get into all of that, except to say that it did have an impact on me. And how could it not? It does every child. And ultimately, they divorced, and I ended up having some real challenges and struggles and trials during that time in my life. My grades weren't where they needed to be, but I still had this dream. I still had this desire of wanting to be a fighter pilot. And then, of course, Top Gun comes out. And we all know what, if you're anywhere near my age, I'm in my early 50s, 53. If you remember that era in the mid-'80s, boy, a lot of people my age and even a little older and a little younger than me, the Navy got their run of enlistments just because of that movie, as well as people going into ROTC or wanting more interest in the Naval Academy and military aviation in general. And so here I am, this kid, I'm going through my own trials and my own struggles, and my grades aren't where they need to be, but I never got into trouble. Not really. I didn't do drugs. I didn't didn't do the things that would land a kid as a high risk for not being able to get into the military, because there was just that dream that was always there. I remember I'd go to the air shows, and at that time in the mid 80s in Oklahoma City, it had one of the largest air shows in the United States. And so here's a picture of me standing next to a pilot. I'm about 15 years old in this picture. This is me with a pilot of an F-15. Now this next picture, an SR-71 flew in for this air show. If you're not familiar with that particular aircraft, it's still technically recorded as the fastest aircraft that's ever existed. This airplane was top secret. And so it was all roped off, and you couldn't get anywhere near the plane. You could look at it from a distance. And I happened to ask the pilot. They had guards. You can see in the picture the guy on the right, the emblem. That was a military policeman. He had an M16 over his shoulder. There was probably about 8 of those guys around the airplane just guarding it. So anyway, I happened to ask if I could take a picture with the pilot, and the pilot cleared it with the MP, and they took me over, and I got to take a picture with this guy. And what an amazing moment that was. Boy, that was just a real treat. So I'm going to all of these air shows. I'm around military aviation. I still go to Utah and see my grandparents. I'm still enamored with it, but life isn't what it should be if I want to be a military pilot. And so I do just enough to get out of high school. So I enlist in the Navy because they had a program called Boost, and they set aside 20% of all the ROTC seats for enlisted personnel that could qualify for this program. And lo and behold, I get into the Navy. I'm excelling in the Navy. My commanders and my division officers, they all have an idea that, well, no idea. I made it very clear why I enlisted, and they went out of their way to help me. They really blessed me. But it's during this time, go back into high school again. I'd come to know Jesus at First Baptist Church, Mustang, Oklahoma, through my best friend at that time, and who was a strong believer. And I spent a lot of time around him and his family. When I went into the Navy, there was a short period of time where I lost some of that, so to speak. But I somehow found myself around military chaplains, around Navy chaplains, and found myself going into the choir and doing stuff, being around them, and that really began to inform my faith. So when I get to my first permanent duty station, we went on retreats with the chaplains and did other stuff. And so I began going to church up in Connecticut, where I was stationed at the submarine base up there. And that's ultimately where I met my wife. And so I got accepted into Boost. But just a couple of weeks before I was due to go to college at the University of Oklahoma, President Clinton cut that out of the budget, and I didn't get to go. It changed the trajectory of my life. And here's what it did. It was about a year later, maybe not even, that I met Nicole. And a month before I got out of the Navy, July 24th, 1993, she and I got married. August 20th, I got out of the Navy. And we went on a journey for a couple of years. And our firstborn came into the world, our son. And I ended up going to Lancaster Bible College, would later get commissioned in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard as a military chaplain, and served 5 years in that capacity and had an incredible experience. And that led me later to Dallas Seminary and all of these other adventures that I've had, and now back into pastoral ministry, where we're planting a church in our local area. We're starting these unique men's ministries to help men connect with their godly masculinity, and working with pastors to help them work through the challenges and the trials of ministry. And all of that to say, all of the seeds for this were planted back when I was 4 and 5 years old, all around military aviation. I still go to air shows. If there's an air show within a couple of hours from me every summer, you can guarantee I'm going to be there. I like to build models of military aircraft. This one here is one of my most recent. It's an F-14, and I built this one from, I had a great time building this model. It's kind of a learning one for me. It's been a while since I've done these. But just weathering it and learning, some of the basics of building these things again, it's been quite a journey. And so I worked on an AWACS, and I'm about to start on an F-16, and so each one kind of keeps getting better than the one before. So anyway, all of that to say, what did this ultimately do? It brought me to Christ. and it brought me to ministry. And God used those things and used that one thing in my life to protect me. That one thing changed the trajectory of my life. That one thing became a central key component to what God did. So what did he do in your life? What one thing did he use in your life? I want to hear your story. Please leave a comment below. If I see one I resonate with, I want to engage with you on it and have a discussion back and forth. So thank you so much for watching to this point. God bless you. I can't wait to engage with you below, and we'll chat soon.